When Cody Bellinger was non-tendered last week, he became the first player in MLB history to be a former MVP who didn't hit free agency and was non-tendered. This makes him the most compelling, low-risk, high-reward proposition in free agency. Should the Mets go after Cody Bellinger to replace Brandon Nimmo next season? I'll discuss that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor, and where I also just wrote a piece on Cody Bellinger titled Cody Bellinger is the best low-risk bet in free agency. And basically, the entire basis of my argument of why he's the best low-risk bet in free agency is because the floor of Cody Bellinger, even if he can't hit a lick, is a quality defensive center fielder in a market where you really don't have a lot of options at center field. It's Brandon Nimmo and Kevin Kiermaier, and you look at Bellinger versus Kiermaier, 5 years younger, about as high of a ceiling defensively, and the upside offensively is obviously much higher. I'm not saying Cody Bellinger is ever going to be an MVP, but there could be some middle ground here, particularly with the elimination of the shift for a batter that pulls the ball over 45% of the time in his career. But let's take things back a step here, because the fall from grace for Cody Bellinger is a remarkable story. We just do not see that. A guy that can rise to the heights of being the most valuable player in baseball to fall off the cliff to being statistically the worst hitter in all of baseball over the last 2 seasons. That's what Bellinger has been. You look at WRC Plus, which measures hitters based on a league average of 100. Over the last 2 years, among hitters who have had at least 900 plate appearances, so regular playing time, no one has a worse WRC Plus than Bellinger at 69. That is 12 points lower than the next highest guy, which I believe is Miles Straw, another defensive first center fielder. But again, he was an MVP, and it's not like it was simply the rabbit ball 2019 season that led to this guy's success. Granted, a big part of it, 47 home runs that season, and that was his MVP campaign. But you look prior to that, he was the Rookie of the Year in 2017. Say what you want about the baseballs were then. I don't know. And that's also sign stealing. A lot has happened in the game. But still, here was a season where he hit the ground running, hit 25 home runs by the All-Star break, set just countless rookie records for the Dodgers, including one where it was the first player, I think in MLB history actually, to homer 10 times in a 10-game span. The guy showed that ignitability. He went into the home run derby. He put up, a 39 home run season as a rookie with a 267 average, 352 on base, 581 slugging, 97 RBIs, 138 WRC plus. The next year in 2018, he spends the entire year healthy, plays all 162, hits 25 home runs, has a 120 WRC plus. A step back from where he was for sure in 2017, but he still was an above average all-around contributor. They began to put him out in the outfield a little bit, as well as playing him in first base. You kind of saw that versatility he brought to the table. You look at what they did in the playoffs that year. He was the NLCS MVP in Game 4 of that NLCS. They do some maneuvering. He ends up in right field in the extra innings, makes a diving catch that saves a double in the top half of the 13th inning, then gets a walk-off single in the bottom of the 13th, hit a go-ahead home run in Game 7. He was clutch. He's played in all the big games. And again, you go from Rookie of the Year 2017, NLCS MVP in 2018, 2019 he wins the MVP, and then 2020, even though we begin to see a regression, there wasn't one that we'd be too concerned about because everyone's numbers were a little bit weird in 2020. He still hit 12 home runs in 56 games, had a respectable 112 WRC plus, so he was better than your league average hitter. And also, if you look at the strikeout rate, here's a guy that started off his career with a 27% strikeout rate and then began to cut that down. His MVP season, unbelievable, 14.4% walk rate, 16.4% strikeout rate. The following season, it was 12.3% walk rate, so a slight tick down, and a slight tick up on strikeouts, but to 17.3. Nowhere near as bad as it would get over the last two seasons, where we've seen those numbers plummet to a point where his walk rate is below 10% in each of these two seasons, the first time that ever happened in his career. And his strikeout rate went all the way back up to 27%, the same percent it was at when he was a rookie. That's where we're at here. It's the tale of two guys. And, if we go through the stats, which I'll do in the next segment here on what he did in the first four seasons and then compare it to what he did in the last two seasons, you'll see a clear picture of what this guy has been and what he's become. And it's trying to figure out if there's any bit of optimism that he can get back to that point. So I want to go through the numbers a little bit more on that sort of dichotomy from the first 4 years to the next 2 years. We'll get to that in just a minute. Before we do, though, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. You can find all of your free agents, the main ones available if you want to bet on where they will land. Jacob deGrom's available, Aaron Judge. These are the big names that you can look for. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. From 2017 through 2020, Cody Bellinger was one of the best young players in baseball. And obviously the 2020 season isn't quite what the first 3 years were, but I'm lumping it in because the data was still good in those years as compared to what it's been the last two seasons. And part of it that you could look back to is there was a shoulder injury in 2020 at the end of the year. So did that shoulder injury sap his power? I think there's a better chance that it's the shoulder that hurt him when it comes to his power than just the baseball, because this is the biggest thing you're going to note when we look at these numbers that I pulled in this article. So the slash line is clear, okay? The first four seasons of his career, he was a 273 hitter. That dropped 80 points the last 2 years at 193. He hit below the Mendoza line for two full seasons. Combined, obviously. I think he was just above it this year, and he was dreadful in 2021. We'll get into that comparison in a second. But the on-base percentage dropped over 100 points. 364 his first four seasons, 256 the last two. Slash line, 547 slug, 355. So almost 200-point drop-off, 123 home runs, down to 29. Again, that was over 4 seasons. But if you look at the home run to fly ball rate, 21.2% first 4 years, 10.5%. So what happened? Well, he stopped hitting the baseball hard, and that's what also led to the WRC plus discrepancy of 137 to 69. I already addressed the strikeouts to the walks those first 4 years, 21.5% strikeout rate. Last 2 years, 27.1. Walk rate, 12.4%, down to 7.7. But you look at max exit velo. Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because first 4 years of his career, every single season, he produced an exit velo of at least 110 miles per hour. And the highest he ever had was in 2018 at 112.9. The last 2 years, that max exit velo is down to 107. So that's a 3 mile per hour drop in his max exit velocity, and that's just the max. The average exit velocity has come down too, and it's just not being able to consistently hit with that same power he had early in his career. It's a guy who has shown some sapped power, and you try to figure out what that's from. Is it the baseball? Is it the shoulder? We don't really know, but it's glaring. And then with that, he's tried to compensate by lifting the ball more, trying to get those home runs. That hasn't worked for him. You see his launch angle go to 22 degrees and then to 20 the last 2 years. It was never above 20% or a 20 degree angle. It was at 16 to 17.9 his main years there. So lifting more but getting less results because he's not hitting the ball harder. Lifting more, but the fly ball rate or the home run to fly ball rate still got cut in half. There's not a lot of room for optimism based on the numbers. This is a guy whose career is clearly on a downward trajectory, and betting on him to replace a player who is as productive offensively as Brandon Nimmo is not a smart investment. With that said, there's still a world where this makes sense. And it's when Brandon Nimmo gets priced out, okay, and let's just say you prioritize signing Jacob deGrom and Kodai Senga to really build out that rotation. And you're trying to find a solution to who plays center field now that Nimmo signed a 6-year, $144 million contract with the Colorado Rockies or something along those lines. If that happens and Bellinger is still waiting on the market, and there is a chance, look, Scott Boras has Brandon Nimmo, he has Cody Bellinger, he has Michael Conforto, all as his clients. So with the interest that Nimmo is getting, you could see him, kind of either one of two ways. They can either go with Bellinger first, and a team that maybe isn't sure if they got Nimmo might overpay for Bellinger, or they can let Nimmo kind of set the market, and then Bellinger becomes the top center fielder on the board. Because again, 5 years younger than Kevin Kiermaier, with the same defensive ability, with the potential to hit a lot of home runs. And the thing is, you have this shift is going away. This is a guy that pulls the baseball a lot. So let's just say from this past season, he had 19 home runs, stole 14 bases, okay? Let's just say that this upcoming year, he gets an additional 10 hits, maybe 15 hits without having to hit against that shift anymore. He can go from a 210 hitter, which he was this year, to 245. The on-base percentage, let's say, goes from 265 to 310. With those additional turns on base, could he swipe an additional 6 bags? And could he hit one more home run than he did this year? Because if he does that, you're talking about a starting center fielder that's 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases. He still drove in close to 70 runs this year. You put him in as, your 8th hitter. Like, there's still a world where it makes some sense to sign Cody Bellinger. And there's a lot of teams who are going to bet on that upside. Also, they're going to hope that maybe another year removed from the initial shoulder injury, maybe something can click. Now, betting on a guy to be better than they were with the Dodgers, not necessarily a place you want to be, but when someone is as athletic as Cody Bellinger and his baseline floor is still a really good defensive center fielder, it allows him to really have a widespread market here. Because if it was his hitting profile and he was just a first baseman like he used to be, I mean, there's not a lot of teams that are going to look at Bellinger and want him. Like, you don't want Cody Bellinger coming up to the plate right now over Daniel Vogelbach. I know that sounds crazy, but that's where they are as hitters. But you could prefer Cody Bellinger to a Kevin Kiermaier, to having a team where you shift Jeff McNeil into right field and you got Louis Guillorme starting at second base. As much as I love Guillorme, there is still that ignitability where Bellinger could catch fire on the right year and trying to play for a contract on a short-term deal. That's the big thing here too. You're not signing this guy to a 5-year deal. You could maybe get the best of Bellinger, and who knows, maybe even if it's not what he used to be, if he hits 250 with a 320 on base percentage, hits 25 bombs, swipes 20 bases, puts up a 117 WRC plus and plays Gold Glove caliber defense in center field, it's not going to be what Nimmo was this year, but it could be close to it. Not to mention he's been pretty durable in his career, so that's another thing that you like from him. Here is the move that I think really would be incredibly galaxy brain by Billy Epler. If you can't bring back Brandon Nimmo, why don't you take the money that you would give him over 1 year, split that up between Cody Bellinger and Michael Conforto, and really improve the overall depth and versatility of your roster, and you get 2 Scott Boras clients, so maybe something can be worked out there. I'll discuss how that would come together in just a minute, but first, another word from our sponsors. When I projected what Brandon Nimmo would make in free agency, I ended up settling on a 6-year, $144 million deal. That's $24 million a season. Right now, it appears like he will get at least 20, if not all the way up to maybe 25 million, and he's probably going to get at least 5 years. So with that contract, with his injury history, not to say that I don't want Nimmo back. Still, I have been pretty consistent throughout the offseason that if nothing else, just bring the guys back. Just bring back DeGrom, bring back Nimmo, and I honestly believe that this team was good enough this past year that with the development of some of the young players and Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty in particular, the Mets can hit another gear next season and they can be just fine. Obviously, they have to build out a bullpen. You still would like to get a number 3, if not bringing back Chris Bassett, but as long as they're able to fill those 2 main spots with DeGrom and Nimmo returning, I feel like this will be a successful offseason. If you bring back the big 3 of Diaz, DeGrom, and Nimmo, perfect. But that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of long-term investments. And if the Mets decide to go in another direction, or if Nimmo decides to take an offer from another team, that's better. And you have to find a way to fill your outfield. Taking the 2 highest upside bets in free agency, guaranteeing some playing time and bring him into the mix, it's a worthwhile gamble. And how this would come together is if you went to Scott Boras, okay, and you basically said, look, we want to keep these guys healthy. We want to work with you. We want to capitalize on the upside of a Bellinger and a Conforto. We'll offer them both 1+1 deals. And you can bring them into the mix, and they will split playing time in the outfield and at first base, and you'll juggle Mark Canha, Michael Conforto, Starling Marte, and Cody Bellinger in the outfield, with Bellinger taking some time to get Pete off his feet at first base. You can DH Pete a little bit. You can play Marte in center with Conforto in right and Canha in left. You can play Canha in center a little bit with Conforto in left if you want to, with Marte in right. There's a lot of ways you can mix it up. Bellinger obviously being able to mix back and forth, and you have the DH spot. And what you would essentially be doing is you'd be, making Daniel Vogelbach's place on the roster a little bit irrelevant, but with Conforto's injury concern, you can keep him around, see what happens. If you were to do that, the team looks pretty good. I mean, if you can dream out a roster that has Cody Bellinger and Michael Conforto to go along with the incumbents, and then you project out maybe adding an Alvarez and the Beatty to the mix throughout the season, that can be one of the best offensive teams in baseball. And if everything breaks absolutely right, you can turn Mark Canha into your 4th outfielder. You can have Bellinger in center, Conforto in left, Marte in right. And if Canha's your 4th outfielder, then that would mean that somebody else grabbed that DH job, whether it be Alvarez with your defensive catchers, whether that be Mark Vientos, whether that be a Brett Beatty or Eduardo Escobar. You just have a ton of depth, a ton of options. Now, contractually, this is where it gets difficult. And also, these are 2 guys that really have to be thinking about themselves. As much as they want to win, and I'm sure both of them do, Bellinger's done a lot of winning when it comes to the teams. Playing for the Dodgers all these years. He was supposed to hit free agency after this season, and he'll be 28 following this year. So you can hit free agency young still off of a good season and get paid, or at least get paid maybe not what you would have gotten as an MVP hitting free agency, but get a nice salary over a long-term deal. Conforto just wants some playing time. I mean, he's just been hurt. He missed an entire season. So these guys, I think the playing time is most important, but if you can guarantee some semblance of 450 to 500 plate appearances each, and it could be a little bit of a meritocracy where they'll both get the first crack at the starting lineup, and you give them a very competitive offer, I think this works. And the way that I think the Mets can really put things in their favor is by offering the 1+1. You can offer them incentives, and you can outspend what the market might dictate on these 2 guys who still together might not cost you more than $25 million, or maybe it is a little bit more. Let's just say it's 15 for Bellinger and 12 for Conforto. It could be $27 million for 1 year, with maybe an option on the second year that the player can opt into. At a reduced cost than what they'd be getting on the first year. So, the Mets would maybe be in a position where if either of them didn't perform, they'd get them back, but on a little bit more of a reasonable contract. I think that is something that makes a lot of sense. And, I really could see it happening if the Mets just decided that they wanted to zero in on those 2 guys. I don't think that this is something that would develop right away, but if, Nimmo comes off the board and you're trying to figure out what's next and you can't find any other center fielder and you just aren't quite sure, I think that there is an outside chance they could pull that off. More likely, though, it would be one or the other. And of these two players, I still think Conforto would be the better bet in the sense that offensively, I just see it a lot more. And I think that you can get by with Marte in center for a year. Um, I also think that Bellinger could get a lot more expensive than Conforto. I think because of the durability, because of that upside, or even the upside and the floor that he presents as a really good defensive center fielder, I think he's going to have offers that are going to be actually much more than what Conforto ultimately gets. But you never know what the market will dictate. So I think these are both interesting gambles. And again, because of that home run potential that they both give you, because of, I think, the high floor defensively they both provide. When it comes to free agent alternatives to Brandon Nimmo, I think these are the best two options. They're both, though, big steps down from what Nimmo provided, and you'd be hoping for some really big bounce backs and really hoping for them to be kind of the surprises of the season. That's what you'd be counting on. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around the sports world, with instant game reactions, breaking news, and the take of the day. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.